So we are up to Q4 2021. Again, like I was saying, most outlets do Game of the Year listings and writings and videos and YouTube streams and all that kind of stuff during December. But some outlets like Easy Allies, if you're familiar with them, they're one of my favorites, and Giant Bomb, or whatever they are considered now. I know they're kind of like in a transitional phase still, I guess. I don't know, but apparently they're doing their Game of the Year stuff. I don't think they've done it yet, but those two outlets I know wait until like mid-January, so I've kind of adopted that for myself. So these are for the games that I finished during fourth quarter, which would be October, November, December. So October through December, which I did finish a lot, surprisingly. I did have a little bit more time off around the holidays during the end of the year from work, so I did finish a good amount. So I start with kind of an intro of sorts. I said the year's finally coming to an end. If you're reading my blog for the first time, my goal with these quarterly posts is to write a paragraph or two for each game I've beaten during each quarter of the year. There's both an online community and a Discord comprised of like-minded individuals who enjoy sharing their progress and impressions on the games they've completed throughout the year. During the fourth and final quarter of the year, I've continued to have some sort of post-vaccinated life. So this intro is usually a little bit more personal to kind of like set things up. Although the pandemic continues to rear its ugly head, I've continued to dip my toes back into society over the past few months despite my reservations. I've reconnected with friends I haven't seen since before the pandemic, been to the movies numerous times, went camping, got to the beach, and even visited New York City. And I don't think I wrote it here, but I also went to California for the first time. So because of this, I haven't completed as many games as I have in previous years, especially when compared against 2020. With that said, here are the games I did manage to beat during the months of October through December. If you would like to see what I've completed during the third quarter of the year, you can read about that here. So I have like some links you can actually click on within my actual blog posts. If you were actually visiting my, it's a WordPress website, which is, I've been meaning to maybe transition to Squarespace, but I haven't. I've just been sticking with WordPress, and I've been wanting to change the name of it or the domain of the site, because when I first created it, I kind of just named it after myself and my middle name. But since being on Twitch with this unexpected enemy kind of setup, I've been wanting to rebrand it to make it more consistent. But it's not the case right now. So this was the 37th finish of 2021 for me, and it was actually my yeah, I saw your post about moving in and getting your bed and everything, so that's gotta feel really good, right? I know you said you felt really happy about it all, so that's good. All right, so Alex Kidd in Miracle World DX, developed by Merge Games Jenkin team, is probably my least favorite game that I played in 2021. Even at the time of writing this, and since then it still is, I think. I have no nostalgia for the original Master System release, and as an adult, I can't say I enjoyed my time spent with this remake either. Miracle World DX takes the same approach as Lizard Cube's Wonder Boy, the Dragon's Trap remake back in 2017. You can switch between both the new visuals and/or audio tracks on the fly, which is certainly a welcome addition. The developers did add some new collectibles and modes, but from my understanding, it's mostly a one-to-one remake of the 1986, the year I was born, classic. Do the math in your head to figure out how old I am. Alex Kidd is not an easy game, however. If the player takes a single hit, it's game over, and the collision detection with monsters and hazards is very strict. You're almost always bumping into the sides of spikes or other traps, causing an immediate death. This picture was hard. Like I purposely wanted to, or make sure I included this picture specifically. This screen, it's towards the end of the game, is like the worst. There's a trick to it. I'm not gonna say it on here, because if you do play this, either figure it out yourself, or look it up out of frustration if you roadblock here, because it's infuriating if you don't know the trick to this room, and I didn't, so I had to look it up actually, and I hate looking things up. Hey Jay Fries, thanks for the resubscribe. How are you? My least favorite aspect of Alex Kidd is the rock, paper, scissors RPS boss battles. This is one of the most infuriating minigames I've ever experienced. There's no tells clues outside of an item that you can collect, which you can lose instantly if you die. So if you're expected to either guess and get lucky or bang your head against the wall until you beat your opponent. Apparently, I read after I finished the game that each boss plays the same hand every round. So while there is a pattern, you've got to have a pretty good memory to recognize the fact. The updated graphics in Miracle World DX look relatively nice, although I still prefer the approach to the visuals Lizard Cube made with their Dragon's Trap remake. There's also a few tracks that I enjoyed, but there's nothing too memorable here. I begrudgingly finished the game after a few short sessions. It's not a terribly long game, but also one I don't see myself returning to anytime soon. Yeah, I hated Alex Kidd. Like, I really didn't like this game. Yeah, J-Fries, you're still, are you still on Chain of Memories? More power to stomaching the GBA version, especially. I actually played through Riku, Sora's, story of the remake. So, like, the PS2 remake that's in the PS4 collection. Like the 3D remake, I guess. I never played or owned the GBA, and I know that's like pretty, I think that's asking a lot, so like, more props to your willpower to buckle through that game. Oh god, 54 hours? Oh my god. That's a lot. Yeah, so anyway, there's been so many remakes and remasters as of late, or at least like within the past few years, and especially last year there were a ton of remakes, and for whatever reason I played 2 remakes, remasters, whatever you want to call them, from 2021, and they were probably like some of like the worst or like not so great ones I could have picked. There were so many other remakes or remasters that I probably would have or should have played over the ones that I did, but whatever. I played Alex Kidd. I actually hated it. I really don't like it, and I have no nostalgia for the original release. So if you grew up with it and you liked it when you were younger, sure, but I think it's just a bad game. And I'm very like patient, and I don't hate a lot of things, so I like playing I like bad games usually, but it's just like not a fun bad game. Yeah, those Kingdom Hearts games are gonna take you on a ride, I think, Jay Fries. I would say probably gets. Did you do both Riku and Sora, like both stories, or just Sora? Because I think you get. I don't know if that's a game that has like a true ending if you do both sides. I only finished Sora on the remake, like I said, so, and that was kind of enough for me. All right, game 38, Sable. The debut game from Shedworks is an open-world, non-linear adventure game. Not unlike Breath of the Wild, in Sable, you play as a wandering nomad of sorts who, after completing a rite of passage, sets out into a barren wasteland to see the world and encounter life experiences. It's a game with no combat or worldly threat, which was refreshing once I realized what I was playing. Sable is about low-key exploration, discoverability, and relaxed gameplay moments. The Breath of the Wild comparison is appropriate for many reasons, but one that specifically comes to mind is the fact that you can technically finish the game very early on if you choose to. In Sable's world, there are many factions, tribes, and professions to discover out in the wasteland, and you're tasked to engage with some of it, but not all of it. Once you've had your fill, you're asked to head back home to reflect on your journey, as sort of self-imposed retirement, if you will. I love Sable so much. Exploring the world of Sable is an absolute joy. One of the first objectives of the game is to craft a hover bike to make traversing the wasteland more manageable. Breath of the Wild specifically comes to mind as a point of comparison, as there's almost always a landmark or something of interest in the distance that's begging for your attention. The world seems specifically designed around eye-catching landmarks sprinkled around the map. While Sable is somewhat of a 3D platformer at its core, much like Breath of the Wild, you also have the ability to climb nearly any wall in the game. The core gameplay mechanics center around a stamina meter, which dictates what you can climb or explore. Over the course of the game, you'll find Korok Seed-like collectibles which can be traded for stamina upgrades. There are small settlements, larger towns, crashed spacecraft, ruins, and creature-filled caverns to discover, and almost all of these areas rely on your stamina meter to explore. Everything you do in Sable is also tied to a job or profession of sorts, with the ultimate reward being a mask. The masks are also a big deal in the world of Sable. Not only are they proof of mastery for a specific job or profession, they're also needed to trigger one of the game's many endings. The writing is exceptional too. Your main character doesn't speak, but has internal monologues often. Conversations and quests will also play out differently if you've already completed something prior to speaking to the quest giver. I always get like in the weeds with some of my writing. Similar to Recompile, another game I finished this year and wrote about. The endings are mostly in written form, yet they're quite insightful and still impactful. Outside of some fairly significant stuttering or performance issues at or near launch, which at the time of writing this have mostly been patched, I truly adored the world of Sable, and I couldn't stop thinking about it once I saw the credits roll. I completed the game with nearly everything done and collected, but I chose the path of the cartographer ultimately, which just meant unveiling the entire map. Or unveiling. Sable is the closest I've gotten to experiencing the feelings I had when I first played Breath of the Wild. For that reason alone, it's a truly special experience. Yeah, check out Sable. It's only on Xbox and PC at the moment, but if you have any, if you like open world games in general, and if you really liked Breath of the Wild, it's the closest I've gotten to, like, there's so many open world games, and actually since Breath of the Wild, there's been open world games that have been kind of like, not inspired by, but kind of like redirected by, I feel like it's influenced like some design decisions for games after like the fact. And Sable definitely like captures a lot of what I think like was because of like Breath of the Wild's influence. It's such a cool game. The Artful Escape, Game 39, developed by Beethoven and Dinosaur, is a 2D side-scrolling adventure game with some very minor rhythm elements. You play as Francis Vendetti, an aspiring artist who's living in the shadow of his uncle's legacy. As Tim, this is very like, I think I'm the only person who maybe thought about this. As Tim Henson from Polyphia, one of my favorite bands, would likely say, The Artful Escape is a game about playing boomer riffs. If you don't know what boomer riffs are, just Google it. It's a guitar style, I would say, that older like rock musicians would probably play. I'll just say that without like offending anyone. The Artful Escape is not unlike games such as Limbo, Inside, Another World, or Heart of Darkness. However, there's far less gameplay here or the puzzle platforming you'd expect from the aforementioned titles, despite bearing similarities to the subgenre of sorts. I love saying of sorts. I don't know if I'm using that right or if that's like correct. The Artful Escape is an audiovisual tour de force. It's at its best when the music is swelling, you're wailing on your guitar, and the beautiful alien-like landscapes take front and center. It's not so much a game than it is an experience. I hate saying that, but it kind of is. In the Artful Escape, you simply run left to right, holding down one button to strum your guitar as alien creatures and fauna bounce and weave in the background. Eventually, you arrive at stage-like encounters where the game turns into a glorified round of Simon Says. I was playing on my Xbox Series X, so a handful of the face buttons and bumpers are mapped visually onto boss-like creatures, which, so for example, if you look closely, I took a picture of this. These, you can, I mean, it's kind of obvious, but like these three kind of where the eyes are, and then the forehead, and then like where the eyebrows are, those are mapped to like the button layout on your controller. And they like will light up, and you have to basically like play Simon Says and hit the correct button in order. That's the gameplay, other than running from left to right and jumping sometimes. From there, you simply press the correct button that lights up in order to complete the encounter. It's not the most rewarding or interesting gameplay sequence, but the spectacle of it all, combined with the soundtrack, sells it. The Artful Escape is yet another indie game about rejecting your legacy and finding your own voice. I'm all about that message, but I swear to God, I played pretty much like every indie game I felt like I played last year had the same message, which was like, you know, fuck your legacy. Who cares? Like, you know, what your parents want you to be, like, find your own voice, which is awesome, but it's like, that's like I feel like that was every message. Like, Chicory was about that. Artful Escape was about that. They approach it differently, obviously, but I was getting a little, like, bogged down by the what felt like the consensus message of last year in terms of some games. The visuals and art direction are beautiful. The music is undeniably good, and an all-star cast should have just been all-star cast rounds out the characters, including the likes of Carl Weathers and Jason Schwartzman. I completed the game with all the achievements earned after a few short sessions, but there's hardly any replay value here. Unfortunately, it's a one-and-done experience that I'd still recommend in a heartbeat, though. Artful Escape's cool. It's visually, it's really impressive. I would play it for the visuals and the music, even if you're not like a kind of like rock. It's very like just, I don't know what era of rock I would call it. Like kind of, to me, it felt like 80s hair metal. But I could be wrong. Maybe I'm kind of representing it. All right, my 40th completion last year was Tori 2. I had a really fun stream with this, if anyone's still in chat. I think Jay Fries, you showed up a few times when I was playing this. It's the follow-up sequel to Tori 3D, a short 3D platformer that pays homage to the PS1 and 64 platformers of yesterday. I've said the same thing about the first game, but Tori 2 is the type of game you'd see someone speedrunning at SGDQ, AGDQ at 2 a.m. Actually, which is funny, AGDQ is currently going on. I've been keeping it on in the background streaming while I work. I don't know. I haven't looked at the schedule. I don't know if this game's actually on it. I think it'd be funny if it was. Or maybe I'll run it one day, but I probably won't. It's also more or less the same game as the original, only with different levels and a better soundtrack. Shout out to Sparkle Park, I Wanna Love You, which like is a really fun guilty pleasure kind of track. There's like lyrics in it. It's really cool. It's really cute. You can still tackle stages out of order, and the game culminates with a final boss that felt akin to something out of Klonoa Door to Phantom Mile, my favorite PS1 platformer of all time. Just like the first game, there are stars and CDs to collect and A or S ranks to earn in order to unlock additional characters. Now that we're 2 games deep, I'd love to see a more fleshed out Tori game, perhaps one that is not focused on speedrunning. The core gameplay mechanics and overall structure of the course design begs for the player to learn shortcuts, cut corners, and master the controls. I completed the game with everything collected and half of the S ranks earned. It's an extremely short game. You can finish it in a single sitting, but it's meant to be replayed and mastered. I'll definitely come back to the game to complete the rest of the time trials down the road. And I think I just took a picture of what I did manage to finish. That's one thing I've been trying to do for my writing, is to like include my own personal pictures and not just pull like, you know, stock images online from another website or whatever. Yeah, I really like Tori. It's fun. It was super short, and at this point, you probably, anyone who's been watching or following me for however long they've been. I like short games. I like knocking games out off my backlog and towards my completion for the year. So like, you could finish this in a sitting, and it feels good, and it plays well, and it's fun. So I'm all about that. Steel Assault is the next game, developed by Zenobia Interactive and initially launched as a another fucking spelling mistake. Kickstart project, should be Kickstarter project, back in 2015, is a 2D action platformer that clearly pays tribute to 16-bit era games like Contra, Castlevania, and even Metal Slug. I've said this countless times at this point, but we've been inundated with sprite-based, retro-inspired 2D tribute pieces for many years now. I'll keep reiterating that, because I want more 3D games from indie developers, like Tori 2. Steel Assault certainly stands out with its beautiful hand-drawn visuals, gorgeous background art, and vibrant colors. The game itself looks and plays like a dream too. Your primary weapon is an electric whip that's satisfying to use, which can destroy certain types of enemy fire and be swung in all directions. You can also slide and knife punch enemies up close, similar to Metal Slug when they're in range. The game's biggest differentiator is a zipline. I keep saying it. Of sorts. I love saying of sorts. That you can freely attach to most walls or surfaces. This mechanic is utilized very cleverly during boss encounters and even during some of the stage traversal. The problem with Steel Assault is that it's incredibly short. Lately I've enjoyed shorter games, especially as I've gotten older, but this seems unusually brief. I'm not sure if this was the original vision of the game, or a product of it being a Kickstarter project. Nevertheless, what's here is good, but I definitely wanted more, which is rare. Like, usually, if a game's really short, I'm like, fuck it, like, that's that. Like, I can knock it off my list, like that. Another completion. Another credits rolled. But actually, this is a game where I'm like, I could have used another, like, 5 levels or something. It's really, really short. The game is less than an hour long and is comprised of 5 stages packed with mini-bosses, platforming challenges, and boss encounters. The boss designs are probably the highlight of the game. They're fun to fight, and the game asks the player to gain mastery over their zipline in order to defeat them. I completed the game on normal mode, but there's a hard difficulty which kicks you back to the start of the stage if you die, and in arcade mode, so there's at least some sort of replay value. I hope the developers follow up with a sequel or an expansion. I gotta make a note of this. I wrote of sorts the second time within the same game description, or the same write-up. I hope the developers follow up with a sequel or an expansion of sorts, because I want to see more of Steel Assault. I don't know why that's why I like doing this, where I've started to like reading my writing out loud and just incorporating it with the streams, because I'm seeing like where either I like my run-on sentences, grammatical, it's like like things that are spelled wrong, like reusing the same word like a million times. I don't know. I don't think I'm even using that correctly, or if I am, it's just, I don't know. Okay. Monamore. Developed by Onion Games and spearheaded by the legendary Yoshiro Kimura, is an arcadey kiss-em-up. I'm saying that fucking again. I can't. Hybrid of sorts. Holy shit! I had no idea I was saying it that often. You're a simple man who's about to marry a princess, but 3 witches kidnapped your bride-to-be, including all of the citizens in the kingdom, apparently. The story doesn't matter, however, because Monamore is an arcade game in the most purest sense. It's all about high score chasing and mastering the game's deceptively deep mechanics. Monamore is a single-screen game too. You start from the left side of the screen, and your goal is to make it to the far side of the screen in order to plant a kiss on a damsel in distress. Similar to games like Flappy Bird or the rocket ship minigame from Onion Games' very own Moon, Monamore is a single-button game. As soon as the game starts, if you're not tapping the A button on the Nintendo Switch Pro controller, for example, your character will fall to the bottom of the screen and it's game over. Oh God, I wrote so much about this game. There are around 50 levels or screens, and every 10 levels or screens you can bank the citizens you've kissed or rescued along the way. Each level or screen is filled with traps and hazards, however. At the top and bottom of the screen, there are tall buildings which slowly expand from each end at the beginning of the level or screen, making your potential flying space much more narrow. I don't even know if this makes any sense to how I'm writing this. If you run into one of the buildings or any of the unique stage boss or hazards, such as a fire-breathing kaiju or meteors from an erupting volcano, you lose whoever's behind you, or rather, the individuals you've kissed along the way. Think of the citizens you've saved as hit points. If you take too many hits and lose everyone you've rescued, the run's over. You can either start from the beginning of the game again or use the citizens list as a sort of level select. I almost thought I wrote of sorts. The catch here is that while you can finish the game from the citizens list and rescue some of the more hidden individuals more easily through this method, Your total high score potential will be much lower than if you were to start from the beginning of the game. So you might be asking, how does the scoring system work? Like, no one's probably asking that. It's surprisingly deeper than one might think at a first glance. Here's some pro tips from someone who managed to break the top 100 positions on the leaderboard, and that was at the time of writing this. And I have that here. You can see I'm ranked 65, but that was taken back in, God, that was like October probably. When you get closer to the person at the end of this level or screen, an arrow indicator will surround them. Depending on how you approach them from either above or below, you can control generally which direction the hearts will be blown from each individual. Hearts give you points, but they can also lead to bigger rewards. The catch here is that the more hearts that occupy the screen, the more potential there is for them to collide with each other, which in turn will make the smaller hearts bigger, netting you more points and the potential for a higher total score. What's genius about this is that it adds another layer to the game's core mechanics. You learn very early on that you're supposed to avoid the obstacles or hazards littered about the screen, but when going for a high score, it's better off if you ignore the hearts and navigate your way through everything until the larger hearts form. There's a classic risk-reward system at play here, and it's incredibly addicting. So I get really in the weeds with this description, but when I was playing the game, I wrote this out, and I wanted to include it just so I had like, it was so mechanically like deep that I didn't realize like how not complicated, but like how deeper the game was than I first realized. So, and no one like enough people weren't playing it and weren't sharing or like ideas or tips or strategies or talking about it. So it was like, it's a niche game to begin with. It's like a Japanese arcade game. It came out on Switch and I think PC. Those are the only places you can play them right now. So I figured I had to write it all down or I'm never going to remember how it worked. In addition to the hearts that are strewn about the screen, there's fruits and melons to collect, which give you points and a shield respectively. Fruit will send a small shockwave once collected, which will move the buildings above or below you backwards. The melon provides invincibility for a short duration, which also allows you to clear the screen, so to speak. They're like bombs in any other shooter. The melon provides invincibility for a short duration, which I already read that. Think of the melon as a traditional bomb in an arcade shooter. You can complete the game in one sitting. A run of the game takes maybe 15 to 30 minutes, but it's meant to be replayed in order to climb the online leaderboards. I completed the game with a true ending, which requires all citizens to be rescued, and I ranked 65th place on the leaderboards. Monamore is one of my favorite games of the year, and it's yet another reason why I continue to love Onion Games as a developer. What feels like a project that started as a jumping off point from their very own minigame found in Moon. That's a really big deep cut. If you haven't played their game Moon, there's a minigame that controls exactly like how this entire game controls. So I think that's where the developers at least pulled like mechanically where their idea came from. And an extension of their free PC release, Romeo and Juliet. Monamore is a culmination of their previous works and one of the best arcadey experiences you can find in 2021. So yeah, this game only took me a few sittings to like do everything in it, but it's meant to be replayed and to gain high scores. Do a run, close it, come back to it if you really like the way it plays, and I really did. I haven't gone back to it since I've like did everything in it. And I was happy breaking the top 100 at the time because I fully understood the game and I knew how it worked at that point. But yeah, I loved it. It was such a cool game. It was a fun game to stream too. Number 43. We're getting there. I think I finished 56 games last year. 56 or 57, so I got a few more to read through, and I'm already feeling it. Toem, developed by Something We Made, as the subtitle suggests, is a top-down, black and white photo adventure. You wake up at your grandmother's house, receive a camera, and set out on a road trip of sorts to photograph and experience a spiritual phenomenon known as the Toem. It's a wholesome, cozy coming-of-age story that's focused on helping others and taking pictures along the way. It's not hard to think about chicory when playing this game, considering it's another black and white indie game from 2021 that focuses on low-stakes gameplay elements and self-reflection. However, that's where the similarities end. Tome feels more like a seek and find than anything else. Each area of the game has a set amount of tasks that must be completed before moving to the next location. The objectives range from photographing a specific person, place, or thing to solving some sort of minor environmental puzzle before snapping a photo, such as assembling a destroyed snowman or using a telescope to spot ships out at a sea during a storm. The person, place, or thing you need to photograph often blends into the environment or is cleverly hidden by the camera angle, which turns the game into a Where's Waldo situation of... I give up. Situation of sorts. I enjoyed the game well enough to 100% it, and most of the elusive pictures are more challenging, and more challenging tasks are doable without a guide, although I had to look up one solution because it was just too cryptic. It's not a game that blew me away or left me thinking about my life like Chicory did, but that's kind of a stretch when I say that about Chicory. Chicory was a lot more thoughtful though. But I'd love a sequel or a new project from these developers at the very least. Tome was fun. I'd still recommend it. 6 hours to 100% it. It wasn't bad. Dojiran. Dojiran, developed by Notlander, is an incredibly challenging 2D precision platformer. It's yet another black and white indie game from 2021, although there's no painting or photographing here. Dojiran barely has a plot, but it doesn't really need one. You're born into a world where you must learn from your ancestors before venturing out into society. There's an intro cinematic, and then you're off to the races where you play as a frog in a series of increasingly difficult levels, 28 total. The controls are simple. The frog can jump and jump and eat apples in order to perform a double jump. One thing Dojiran expects you to master is the edge landing technique, a term I just coined now. The game will expect you to land on the edge of a platform in order to proceed. Typically these platforms... Oh wow, that's horrible. Typically these platforms have spikes on the edge, but there's just enough room to land in order to make your next jump. While there are spike pits, bottomless pits, and other obstacles or hazards to avoid, each stage lacks any sort of thematic cohesion, which was the only slightly disappointing considering its cheap entry point. Stages are short and sweet, and each level has a collectible medal hidden somewhere throughout. Somewhere in the stage, there's also a fly to collect, which grants you an additional hit point, because otherwise you die in a hit. Fortunately, checkpoints are well placed, and as I mentioned, the levels do not overstay their welcome. If you can complete the level without getting hit, the stage select will display the fly as a bragging rights of sorts. Jesus Christ! As far as I know, there's no reward for finishing every level with the fly intact. I completed the game at 100% with the platinum trophy earned and all flies saved. I died nearly 400 times, and it took me close to 5 hours to roll the credits. It was a difficult game, sometimes rewarding, but one I'll probably never return to. If you're a masochist like myself and enjoy challenging platformers, you could probably do worse. Yeah, Dojiran, don't run off to play it. It's okay. Game 45, Bloodstained Curse of the Moon, developed by Artplay and Inti Creates, is the Castlevania successor everyone always wanted. More specifically, however, and I've said this before in previous posts, it's essentially Castlevania 3 adjacent. I've completed the game many times over the past few years, and I've already written about it, but since it has multiple endings, I've been replaying the game each year, getting my fix, so to speak, shooting for a new ending I've yet to see. This year I streamed most of it on my Twitch channel and completed my replay during Halloween. I have one more ending to see and the boss rush to complete before I can put it away on my digital bookcase for good. So until then, I'll see you when the next Blood Moon rises, which will be sometime in 2022. See, I wish I could write as succinct as this is for every game that I play. Like, I don't think... I'm the worst when it comes to... like sharing my writing or like sharing my thoughts on games, like whether it's like networking or just straight up sharing my posts, whether it's on YouTube or even doing this. I don't expect many people just to like click on a random person's like blog to read about the games that they play. And I know I don't really get a lot of traffic to begin with for my blog, but I keep telling myself I just do it for myself because I just can't not do it at this point. But I think like ideally I wish I could write as succinct as like a paragraph like this for each game. I would get to the point a lot quicker, but like sometimes I just need to write it all out. I don't know. All right, my thoughts on Metroid Dread. This is the 46th game I finished last year. Metroid Dread, aka Metroid 5, developed by Mercury Steam and Nintendo, is the long-awaited true follow-up to Metroid Fusion. If you exclude Mercury Steam's very own Metroid 2 remake back on the 3DS, Samus Returns, fans have been left clamoring for a new entry for what feels like a decade or more. I'm not talking about the indefinitely delayed Metroid Prime 4. Metroid Dread feels like a dream game that shouldn't exist by today's standards. Not only does it capture what was so great about traditional old-school Metroid games, it somehow carves its own place in a sea of tribute, homage pieces that the independent scene have been chasing for years now. We've had games like Axiom Verge, Hollow Knight, and Ori, for example, critically acclaimed, in quotes, Metroidvanias or Metroid-likes that for some people have surpassed classics like Super Metroid and Castlevania Symphony of the Night. So how do you make a new Metroid game for jaded, veteran fans and newcomers alike? Mercury Steam was tasked with this monumental impossibility, and they mostly succeeded. Actually, I really like how I wrote. Like, if that would be like the one paragraph I would have for like my thoughts on Metroid Dread. Hey, Arcade Bear, how are you? How you feeling? It's using the yikes. Actually, looking at my emotes now, they don't come across. That's hard to read the writing on that. That's good. Well, I hope it doesn't get any worse. And you know, improvement from day to day is. I guess you can't complain too much, but that still sucks. All right, let me continue. So, whereas Metroid Samus Returns felt like a resume builder for Mercury Steam, or rather proof that the development team from Spain could handle the legendary Nintendo IP with the utmost care, Metroid Dread feels like a mastery of the groundwork that was laid before them. With that said, Metroid Dread does feature a lot of the same elements found in Samus Returns. The counter system returns, and the 3D backgrounds look better and more detailed than ever. Metroid Dread does play with your expectations too. Instead of finding the Morph Ball upgrade early on, you're equipped with a slide which mixes up the traversal during the early areas of the game. Most of the fan favorites are still here, however, the Super Missile, Morph Ball Bombs, Grapple Beam, and Screw Attack, for example, make their usual appearances. If there's one area I felt Metroid Dread was lacking, was its environment cohesion and sense of place. I never felt like I knew where anything was on Planet CDR, despite there being elevators, tram cars, and it should be teleporters. Another mistake. Teleporters connecting each zone in the game. They all somehow felt disconnected from each other. The game structure and flow itself is superb, however. You'll often find yourself feeling lost when all of a sudden the game somehow organically pushes you towards the correct destination due to its pathing and upgrade placement. Similar to Metroid Fusion, someone or something is on the hunt to take down Samus in Metroid Dread. This time around, it's a group of robots hunters called Emmy instead of scripted moments or sequences from the previous game. The robots here are relegated to specific zones that you can freely enter and exit at your will. The robots here will react to your footsteps or presence, and as soon as they're alerted, the zone you're in will lock down until you can put some space between you and the enemy. As you progress further, you'll gain the ability to destroy these hunters permanently, but they become aggressively more difficult as the game progresses. If a robot grabs you, the player is given 2 opportunities to counter their one-hit kill maneuver. These QuickTime events are super strict. Most people, including myself, will die a lot during these sequences. The checkpoints, however, are fair, and you're right back in the action if you do happen to fail. While the idea presents a high-stakes, threatening environment, the fact that the checkpoint is just right outside of the zone makes the entire idea feel less impactful. With that said, if the game booted you back to your last save point, it would have created an even more miserable experience. So it's a fine compromise as it is. Samus herself is mesmerizing to witness and just a pleasure to control. She might be my favorite iteration of the character yet. Unlike the Samus found in Other M, the notoriously divisive Metroid entry from Team Ninja, the Samus here is confident, cool, and downright badass. At times, her attitude reminds me of Platinum Games' very own Bayonetta. After 4 mainline missions, she's grown to become super stylish, and her acrobatics are put on display throughout the numerous cinematics. Speaking of Metroid Dread's cinematic flair, there's so many dynamic camera angles, usually triggered during boss encounters, which truly shows off her strength and experience. I completed the game with over 50% of the items collected in around 8 hours logged. I love to go back and complete the game on the harder difficulty and unlock the remaining ending screens, but I'll save that mission for another day. Metroid Dread is a phenomenal game and a triumphant return to form for fans and newcomers alike. Hopefully Mercury Steam and Nintendo get another opportunity to take us on a trip through space, but maybe not make us wait another 15 years, shall we? Alright, game 47. We're getting there. Capcom's Monster Hunter Rise for the Nintendo Switch appears to be the perfect compromise between old Monster Hunter and the more recent best-selling title, Monster Hunter World. Now running on the beautifully optimized RE engine, Monster Hunter Rise finds its home on Nintendo's latest hardware, striking a fine balance between catering to the series' portable legacy while still offering a traditional home console experience. If you've played any Monster Hunter game before this, you'll feel mostly at home here. If you're not familiar with the franchise and Rise is your first foray into the hunt, you're still going to be mostly lost as the tutorials or onboarding leave a lot to be desired. Rise carries forward a lot of the quality of life improvements first introduced in World, however, such as unbreakable whetstones, infinite bug nets or pickaxes, and loadless zones, while simultaneously offering its own unique gameplay elements to the mix. This time around, in addition to having a kitty follow you, you now have a dog companion to accompany you along your hunts. Just like in World, the non-playable characters act as offline hunters of sorts. So the long-running joke right now, Arcade, if you're still there, is I say or I write of sorts like 1,000 times in my posts. So if you prefer to fight monsters solo, the game's got you covered. Just like any Monster Hunter title, it's best to be played with real people online, and all of that is here and present, of course. Monster Hunter Rise, just like any other entry outside of World, barely has a plot. There are village and hub quests, respectively. Village quests are for single player only. They will take you through a story of sorts. I'm just gonna stop reading. I feel so embarrassed. That last 20 or so hours if you're an experienced player. Hub quests can be played solo or with others online, and just like any other entry, that's where the meat of the game is. You can essentially play any Monster Hunter forever. They're not quite games as a service, but they're also not MMOs. They're somewhere in between, and they offer as much or as little gameplay as you want there to be. I rolled the credits on the story in quotes and put the game down, and unfortunately, I just didn't want to make the time to play the online quests endlessly, nor do I have a dedicated friend group who were as interested in Monster Hunter as I've always been, which isn't totally true. There are people I could play with. I just I'd like to return to the hunt sometime down the road, but my willingness to pick up my insect glaive, which is my main weapon, wanes as the weeks and months pass. There's something about, like, maybe it was just this past year, Monster Hunter Rise would have been a game I would have played like a shit ton of, but I was already playing Destiny 2 as like my online kind of endless game, and this game becomes an endless game once you get through like the story. So I love Monster Hunter, and I was really enjoying it, this one particularly, but like for whatever reason, I played it less than World. I played so much more World back when that first came out. I don't know. Maybe I wanted to like get to other games and not just fixate on one game when I was already playing. Like I said, Destiny 2 is my main online game, so like I don't know. I feel bad because it's such a cool series, and Rise is a really good entry, but I just didn't want to make the time for it beyond like rolling the credits on it. Game 48, Glyph, developed by Bulwark Games, is a precision 3D platformer with an emphasis on collecting things, mastering controls, and completing time trials. He plays a flying... Oh my god, I say it again! You play as a flying beetle scarab, in a post-apocalyptical... It should just be post-apocalyptic civilization of sorts. What the fuck's wrong with me? As you complete levels and collect gems, which are used to reconstruct the game's hub world, you'll gain access to increasingly difficult levels, including time trials. The story is a backseat to the gameplay, although there is an attempt at some world building if you talk to the NPCs that are scattered about the stages. The best thing about Glyph, however, is its controls. It's a physics-based 3D platformer, one that stresses building proper momentum in order to make tricky jumps. Sticking your landing is paramount in this game. The floor is essentially lava outside of the ruins and platforms that dot the wasteland. Glyph will die instantly if they hit the sand. Glyph is the type of game that rewards mastery of the controls. You can perform a higher jump, for example, if you tap the jump button just as you're landing. There are also boost pads, launchers, and other traversal abilities such as a glide to help you traverse the environments. Once the controls click, Glyph feels amazing and it's hard to put down. Glyph is packed with content. The main stages feel like mini open world environments. There are coins, keys, and hidden unlockable skins to collect throughout each level. Gems are used to unlock more stages and time trials. The time trials offer bronze, silver, and gold rewards, which grant the player more gems based on how quickly you can get through each tier. These challenges are more point A to B, however, but they're extremely challenging. Collecting everything in this game and getting 100% is not an easy task. I completed the game with a handful of the time trials completed, where there's tons of optional levels and unlockables if you're willing to spend the time. Glyph is definitely an underrated gem of a platformer this year. If you're a 3D platform enthusiast, you could definitely do worse. Yeah, actually, I started Glyph at the beginning of the year last year. It was like January, February, first quarter. And then I put it down and didn't come back to it till like November. So like, don't give up on games you start during the year, even though I do that constantly. Thanks for yeah, I should do an Alt F. So I'm not reading like the actual the editable like document or like the actual draft. So I'm reading like the thing I posted. I'll do that after the fact though. Yeah, Glyph was fun. I don't know if I'll go back to 100% it. It's pretty demanding to do everything in it. So I loved Happy Game. Oh my god. Happy Game was really good. Happy Game is yet another horrifying point-and-click adventure game title developed by Amanita Design, the independent Czech-based developer, mostly known for their cult classic PC titles such as, I think it's Machinarium or Machinarium, I've heard people say, Samarost, and the more recent Creeks, my personal favorite. Similar to their other titles, there is no spoken dialogue in Happy Game, and instead the game opts for a fake gibberish language, think Banjo-Kazooie if you're unfamiliar. He plays a little boy who's had his beloved toys and stuffed animals taken away from him by what appears to be a ghostly apparition. From there, the boy spirited away on a disturbing quest through surreal and nightmarish scenarios. It's hard to describe Happy Game's tone, but you could say it's frighteningly cozy. The game is littered with smiley faces, bunny rabbits, and other jolly things, but they're almost always distorted or dripping in blood. This is such a fucking awesome picture. Like this is one of the, it's a screen by screen game, so like every screen that you walk into is like a self-contained puzzle of sorts. And that was like one of my favorite rooms. Like each of those smiley heads you see like on the screen were like self-contained puzzles. that you had to like drop into and solve them, and then they would like explode and the whole room would like twist and distort. It's so fucking cool. Happy Game was not a happy game, Gemini. Happy Game is extremely short, but it's not without its satisfying puzzles and aha moments. A lot of the game requires the player to click on certain objects, things in the environment, sometimes dragging or combining one object or thing with the other in order to proceed. There's definitely a degree of trial and error, but there's nothing too difficult here. Most of the scenarios are thankfully logical, although I did need a little help from a viewer when I streamed the game, who just so happened to be one of the developers. That was wild to me. So I streamed, I think I streamed the whole playthrough of this game. I don't remember. But I streamed it on release day, or close to release day, and there was someone in my Twitch chat, kind of like I got the vibe that they played the game before or they finished it. But I'm like, this just came out. How does this person know everything about this game already? So like every time I would get stuck, they would kind of like nudge me and like give me somewhat of like a vague hint, because I didn't want anyone spoiling like the solutions or anything. And then when I finished it, the person in chat revealed like, you know, thanks for playing. I'm one of the creators of the game or whatever. And I was like no way. Like, I didn't really believe him at first, but then I Googled his Twitch name and it took me to his Twitter account, and it was actually the real Twitter account of like one of the developers. So I was like, oh my God, I love this developer's games. Like everything I've played of theirs, and I haven't finished all of their games, but like if you like point and click PC style games, play everything from Amanita Design. They're mostly available on PC and mobile. Like they have a lot of their games on phones. But everything's on Steam and PC as well. Happy Game is on Switch. Creeks is on most platforms. I fucking love... Creeks made my top 10 last year. Happy Game almost made my top 10. I'm gonna spoil that now, but it didn't. What did I leave off? Oh, so unfortunately there's not a whole lot of replay value here unless you really enjoyed a specific room or puzzle, which can be replayed through a level select of sorts from the main menu. With that said, Happy Game was an unsettling, clever, and surprisingly delightful experience that's worth playing if you're a fan of the developer or genre. I've said it before and I'll say it again, I'm forever day one for any or all Amanita Design games. I can't believe how much I say of sorts. Bright Memory, developed by FYQD Personal Studio, is an FPS with melee elements and light exploration. I swear to God, if there's enough sorts in here, you can juggle enemies like it's a Devil May Cry game, but more specifically, it feels like, this is very me, like I would only make this reference probably. It feels like the modern day Xbox One equivalent to the 2004 Namco's Breakdown. It's an extremely short experience spanning just a handful of levels, but it's oddly paced like an old school Sega arcade light gun game. There's weird quick time events, air combos, a simple experience system with upgrades, collectibles, 2 bosses, and even New Game Plus options. The story is completely nonsensical and it isn't worth discussing, although there is a sort of late 90s, early 2000s sci-fi tone or attitude that I appreciated. It's really dumb. The whole game's stupid. Like, this is like one of the dumbest games I've ever played. Time travel's involved, so that's all you need to know, and just when the game feels like it's getting started, the credits start rolling. Bright Memory has an interesting development history. It was created by a single developer, and while an episode 2 was originally planned, the game has since been remade into a full-length title called Bright Memory Infinite, that at the time of writing this is only available on PC. The game for its time was visually impressive, especially considering it was primarily made by one person. Although it's extremely short-lived, there's something about Bright Memory that kept me wanting to replay the game, unlocking all of its achievements and maxing out my character's abilities. While it's a glorified demo of sorts. Bright Memory is an interesting proof of concept for a presumably better sequel. That was pretty succinct. Oh my God. I can't believe it makes a Souls reference with this bonfire lit. It's so lame. It's such a stupid game, but I liked it. Oh god, a Leckhead. Expected enemy of sorts. I'll make that a new. I'll let me get in contact with my friend who made my emotes. I have to check if those free follower emotes are available now, and I'll make it of sorts emote somehow. A Leckhead by solo developer Nama Takahashi and music by Tsuyomi is a masterclass in 2D puzzle platforming design. This game has been one of the biggest surprises of the year. I first saw it during the Osobu event that aired on YouTube back in September of 2021. If you're not familiar with Osobu is a community hub for Japanese independent developers. Our goal is to support indie games and indie game development as a viable career and lifestyle here in Japan through education, advising, promotion, and fostering connections with other indie devs, both domestic and abroad. So I took that from their website, which if you're reading the actual blog post for this, I have a link to their website. The independent gaming scene has become so massive over the past decade or so, that's set of sorts. Certain releases and hidden gems are getting consistently lost in the shuffle. While it's been critically acclaimed by players from the more hardcore gaming community at large and a variety of outlets who did manage to cover the game, a Leckhead hasn't been getting the exposure it rightfully deserves. So I streamed this game for the Extra Life charity that I did back in September, was it? Yeah. And I finished it on stream and I was like blown away by it. A Leckhead is simplicity at its finest. You play as a little robot buddy who electrifies any surface that they touch. You can walk left or right, jump, and eventually toss your head, reminiscent of Dynamite Heady on the Sega Genesis. With such a simple concept, you think the developer would run out of ideas or resort to some sort of gimmick to keep the game interesting. A Leckhead does not rest on its laurels, however. It exceeded my expectations in terms of pacing, creativity, and most importantly, making use of one's limitations. Every screen is an aha moment that must be experienced to truly understand how well made the game is. I'm just totally marking out for this game. It's the perfect example of teaching the player new mechanics or ideas non-verbally without the need of tutorials, dialogue, or even environmental storytelling, although there is some to a degree. I've said this countless times over the past few years, but we've been inundated in 2D retro-inspired platformers. Sometimes a game like a Leckhead comes along to remind you to never judge a book by its cover. Does a Leckhead spark joy? Yes, it's honestly a perfect game, and if it weren't for one other release this year, it would have been actually two other releases. It would have been my 2021 game of the year. That's almost a spoiler for my top 10 list. No surprise, a Leckhead is on my top 10. Fucking incredible platformer. It's on... Yeah, it's a Steam game. It's only on Steam at the moment. Or I guess you could download it from... There might be like a DRM free version on PC in general. I don't know though. But if you like 2D platformers at all, make time for this. We're almost at the end. I can almost take a break. I need to go eat something. This is killing me. But I'm enjoying it, so hopefully y'all are enjoying listening to this. The Good Life. This game was so divisive even for myself. I was actually a little disappointed in it. The Good Life, developed by White Owls and Grounding, is a beautiful mess, which is a feeling I share for most of Swery's games. The creative director behind The Good Life, on their Kickstarter page, which I backed in 2018, the game is described as a debt repayment daily life RPG co-developed by Swery's White Owls and a development team led by Yukio Udatsugi, the creator of Panzer Dragoon and Phantom Dust, or rather, The Good Life is a daily life simulator cross-Sweryism, which is like a term the director uses for his games. There's a lot of pedigree and legacy behind the creation of this game. It was one of my most wanted games for the longest time, and once it got a release date for last year, I mean, I streamed a shit ton of this game, if anyone remembers, for those who are in here right now. And I finished it, but So if you're familiar with the director's previous works, particularly Deadly Premonition, then you should be more or less know what you're getting into. If you're unfamiliar, however, The Good Life is part Animal Crossing with a side of Harvest Moon and a whole lot of jank. The game feels like a lost Xbox 360 or PS3 era game that's simultaneously channeling the essence of your favorite quirky PS2 era Japanese game. Are you lost yet? Good, because now you're in the right place to understand what The Good Life actually is. Yeah, baby. I'm glad you remember that arcade. Yeah, everyone turns into a cat and dog at night, Gemini. In The Good Life, you play as Naomi, a photographer from New York City who's been sent to a fictional rural farm town in England called Rainy Woods. She's been sent here in order to investigate a mystery surrounding the town while giving her an opportunity to pay off her debts, which is where the actual gameplay comes in. The big twist here is that each person in this town turns into a cat or dog at night. As a cat or dog, you can hunt smaller animals for materials, climb certain buildings, unearth hidden items, or even take a piss to mark your territory. Seriously, you just like pee on shit in this game. Like as a dog, there's certain spots you can run up to and just like take a whiz. Unfortunately, the animal portions of the game were underutilized and ultimately felt like missed opportunities. The Good Life can also be very meta as it breaks the fourth wall often, but it's usually saved by its excellent writing and localization. The cast of characters, to no one's surprise, are charming and likable. The citizens of Rainy Woods are weird and interesting, yet they somehow feel more grounded and relatable than Swery's previous works. I will say this, I think the writing and the localization was like brilliant in this game. It's super well written. The voice acting's good. The cast seems pretty good. Which is a shame because the game's just not very fun to play. The Good Life is the perfect example of throwing everything into the game but the kitchen sink. It's systems overload. There's farming, mining, riding and shearing sheep, fashion, photographing, a day and night cycle, weekly missions, quests that are only available if you're either a cat or a dog, a tiredness and hunger meter, status ailments such as headaches, toothaches, colds. Enough! That's how I worded it. That's how I said it in my head. Most of the main story quests ask the player to dip their toes into each activity the game offers, but none of it is rewarding or satisfying. There's also a ton of fetch quests and item collecting which become tiresome due to all of the lifestyle subsystems at play. I wish the ability to turn into a cat or dog was more prevalent than the half-baked farm life sim elements that are present here. The Good Life gives you all of the tools or options, as cumbersome as they may be, to live a quaint life out on a farm, but it's not exactly a place where I want to live in for very long. I finished the game with a handful of the side quests completed, but I didn't want to spend any more time in Rainy Woods than I had to, sadly. I really wanted to like The Good Life more than I did, and I still feel torn about my time spent with the game. Here's hoping Swery gets another shot at making something new, because I truly adore his games for better or worse. Yeah, The Good Life, it wasn't a miss. But it's such a weird game, and it's really only for like a certain type of person. Like I couldn't recommend this to anyone. All right, game 53. Ghost of Tsushima, developed by Sucker Punch Productions, is their latest open-world action-adventure game. And Ghost, I'm just gonna shorten and say Ghost. In Ghost, you play as Jin, a samurai who's tasked to reclaim the Tsushima island during the first Mongol invasion of Japan. For the PlayStation studios that have been around since the PS1 or PS2 days, I always enjoy analyzing a developer's legacy, or rather, their design philosophies or roots that are still recognizable in their latest releases. While the through line here is difficult to describe, you can immediately tell that Ghost is a Sucker Punch production. While most people have forgotten about their N64 roots, Rocket Robot on Wheels. Did anyone remember that game? Because I love that game. On N64, it was like this little robot on like a tricycle or like on a wheel. It was just like a straight up 3D platformer. Sucker Punch Productions is mostly known for their Sly Cooper games back on the PS2. From there, they would graduate to Infamous on the PS3 and 4. Although Rocket Robot on Wheels is their outlier here, all of their previous works have characters sneaking around, climbing rooftops, and tiptoeing across beams and the sort. I almost said of sorts. Ghost is no different in that respect, with how critically acclaimed and commercially successful Ghost has been on the PS4, and into the current generation with the director's cut on PS5. We probably haven't seen the last of Jin's exploits either. I picked up Ghost at launch, played it for a few hours, but then dropped it for months. This is typically my track record with open world games. It's nearly impossible for me to focus on them no matter how interesting or fun they may be. If I start any open world game, it notoriously takes me a year or two to finish one. While most people would suggest beelining it through the main story, it's almost impossible not to stray from the critical path and explore all of the extra content that's available. Same thing happened to me with Guerrilla Games' Horizon Zero Dawn and Insomniac Games' Spider-Man, for example. With that said, meandering off the beaten road does have its benefits in Ghost. The game's flat out gorgeous, and exploring the island of Tsushima consistently rewards you with beautiful landscapes at the very least. Without spoiling the plot, the game's mostly about breaking samurai code and tradition, and it does so by incorporating stealth and assassination into both the gameplay and narrative. With that said, the game doesn't really utilize a good or evil system found in their previous series, Infamous, which may or may not have been disappointing for fans of their previous games. While Ghost is your typical open world game, by and large, there are a few interesting mechanics unique to Jin's journey. The guiding wind mechanic, for example, is an organic natural compromise for finding your way across a relatively traditional open world game map. Instead of setting markers on your map, with a swipe of the pad on the controller, wind gusts will point you in the direction of your marked destination. Tsushima Island is filled with your typical open world distractions too, including strongholds to reclaim, town settlements where you can upgrade your character's equipment, and a fair amount of collectibles. I feel like I would have more to say about the game if I didn't put too much time between my sessions. As I mentioned earlier, it took me nearly a year to finish a playthrough, and there were months where I shelved the game for long periods of time. It's not really the game's fault per se, but more a product of my attention span lately, or lack thereof. I completed the game with a handful of the side quests completed, but I wasn't in any rush to go for 100%. By the time the credits rolled, I wasn't in love with Ghost, but I'll give New Game Plus a whirl down the road to see if I feel different about it when I find time to revisit it. Game 54, Fist, Forged in Shadow Torch, is an impressive debut Metroid-like from a China-based studio, T Games. I feel like I've written this 20 times already this year, but we've been inundated with 2D Metroidvanias and Metroid-likes for what feels like a decade now. While Fist might feel more similar to something along the lines of Shadow Complex, it still carries plenty of Metroid DNA you'd come to expect from the subgenre at this point. There's upgrades which allow you to backtrack to new areas, shortcuts to discover, and max health upgrades to find. So, what makes Fist stand out from the rest, outside of its visuals? I'd have to say the combat system is the most interesting and rewarding thing about the game. Your mechanical arm can ultimately turn into 3 different weapons, and they're used both for combat purposes and traversal. Combat feels punchy and impactful, which it should be considering the size of that thing on your back. Boss fights are challenging as well, and ask the player to master both their primary weapons and the handful of sub-weapons at your disposal, one of which act as a parry mechanic. As I mentioned earlier, Fist does have some nice visuals, specifically in its art direction. Broadly speaking, Fist has a steampunk-like aesthetic, but the game's background art is at times beautiful. In the city areas, for example, neon lights and detailed signage adorn the sides of buildings, while trolley cars bustle up and down the city streets. A lot of the areas in the game feel lived in, which is not an easy task, especially in a Metroid-like where world building isn't always the focus. The worst thing about the game, however, is its writing. The dialogue and voice delivery drove me up the wall, perhaps due to the poor localization. I can't pinpoint what I found off about the writing or dialogue in Fist, but the best way I can describe it is that it feels like a literal translation. I'm also not a fan of the protagonist's deep, overtly serious Solid Snake-like voice and demeanor. I didn't find any of the characters likable, not even the lovable bear partner who makes your equipment. I honestly couldn't have cared less about the story, and don't get me started on the wannabe Catwoman, who may or not be a love interest for our Bucky O'Hare here. I really went hard on this game. I completed the game with a good portion of the collectibles and items found, but I'll come back to 100% it at a later date. I chose this picture to kind of like showcase how much I hate the writing. This was from the final boss, like the final part of the game. and your main character's talking to like the villain, and his rebuttal at some point is, "You are the insane one." I know there's no context here, like you're not seeing the full cutscene, but I was like, "Are you fucking kidding me?" Maybe it's just me. The writing was insufferable in this game. I hated it. Game number 55. I started my New Game Plus playthrough of Marvel Spider-Man Remastered in 2020, but I finally finished the replay of the base game plus all of the DLC, The City That Never Sleeps, for the first time in 2021. This time around, I exhausted nearly everything that has to do in the game, 100% trophies, all benchmarks, which was the worst grind ever, all missable audio recordings and JJJ radio calls. The only thing I didn't do was max out my health. I got to 213 at around 120 hours. The max is apparently 250, as it requires even more excessive grinding that's not worth anyone's time, unless you own an actual Spider-Man suit. That's a really bad joke. I'm not even a huge Marvel comic book guy, but I love Insomniac games, and the swinging in this game just feels too good. I'm finally ready to play Miles Morales in 2022, which I've started, and by the time Spider-Man 2 proper rolls around, I'll be ready. Oh, and the Web Blossom is still overpowered. If you're familiar with the game, that's one of the suit powers you have, and it just kills, like, it just destroys everything. It makes most encounters, like, trivial. Game 56, Kana, Bridge of Spirits, is the debut action-adventure game from Ember Lab. The studio behind Kana is mostly known for their animation background, specifically the Terrible Fate short film. They're clearly a group of talented artists and animators, but what about the game itself? For better or worse, depending on what you value, Kana feels and plays like a PS2, GameCube era Zelda-like. At the same time, the game looks like something that a AAA first-party studio would produce in terms of visuals and production, perhaps even Pixar-like at times. While there are some minor blemishes here and there, like how some foliage or leaves and water do not react to your character's movement, the game's simply beautiful. Kana also reminds me of the types of games you'd receive at or near a system's launch, as it did technically fall within the first year of the PS5's release. Similar to how I felt about Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, it feels more like a promise or roadmap for what true next-gen games will look like or be capable of. I'm actually in the mood to replay this already. This may come off as a negative for some people, but the entire game feels like the first quarter of most 3D Zelda titles, specifically the Young Link portion of Ocarina of Time. If you're just following the main story, it's about a 10-hour game. Just when Kana is wrapping up, most 3D Zelda games are getting started. There's essentially 3 areas or zones with hub-like open spaces, interconnected environments, fast travel points, and many dungeons to conquer. There are numerous sub-bosses throughout the entire game, but each area culminates in some truly challenging boss encounters. Some have said it's Souls-like with its challenging difficulty at times, almost borderline character action game difficulty, but I think it's still more comparable to the types of bosses you'd encounter in a 3D Zelda title. I completed the game on normal, but I'll revisit the game on the highest difficulty, and we'll go for 100% in the Platinum Trophy then. I really like Kana. It was just a lot, I don't know how to describe it. Smaller in scope than what I was expecting, I think. The last game that I technically rolled the credits on in 2021 was, and it was game 57, technically. Touhou Luna Nights, developed by Team Ladybug, is yet another Metroid-like in a sea of 1,000 Metroidvanias. You play as a maid who wields daggers in a virtual mansion of sorts. But none of that matters. The only thing you really need to know is that you get a sword familiar that's akin to the one from Castlevania Symphony of the Night. What else is there to say about this game that I haven't already said about Fist, Metroid Dread, or any of the other dozen or so Metroid-likes I may or may not have played this year? Outside of some gorgeous sprite work and a killer OST, Luna Nights has your typical trappings you'd come to expect at this point. HP max-up items, new abilities to backtrack with, hidden destructible walls, Symphony of the Night style map with an accompanying map percentage. The list goes on. You've seen it all here before, but it's definitely one of the better ones as of late, particularly due to its combat system and boss encounters. Whew. Luna Nights has some interesting gameplay mechanics that set it apart from most Metroid-likes at least. Time manipulation is the focal point for the combat. Your primary weapons are daggers, in addition to having the ability to stop time, both of which can be upgraded. When you throw your daggers, you consume MP. When you stop time, however, you can toss your daggers without consuming MP in one strong volley for massive damage. On top of this, you can gain back time when you graze enemy projectiles when time is frozen. You can also regain health if you graze the same projectiles in real time. The entire game is built around this risk-reward system, and most of the endgame bosses nearly require you to master these techniques. I completed the game around 90% of the map completed and most of the items collected, but there's a hidden post-game area with a true final boss that I'm clearly not prepared for. I actually tried it, and it's just, I have to grind, I think. I definitely want to revisit Luna Nights down the road, but I think I'm finally starting to feel burned out on Metroid-likes, if that's even possible. There's just too many. I keep playing them, though. I keep trying them. And that's the end. That's everything. That was my fourth quarter completions for 2021. So Luna Nights, Kana Bridge of Spirits, Spider-Man Remastered, which was a replay, and all the DLC for the first time. Fist Forge and Shadow Torch, Ghosts of Tsushima, The Good Life, The Head, Bright Memory, Happy Game, Glyph, Monster Hunter Rise, which I didn't really finish, but I saw the credits from the story mode. Metroid Dread, a replay of Bloodstained Curse of the Moon, Dojiran, Toem, Monamore, Steel Assault, Toray 2, The Artful Escape, Stable, and Alex Kidd in Miracle World DX. So yeah, that was everything I played in Q4. Just to kind of wrap things up again. So early December, I actually streamed what I played for the first quarter of last year. So that was January through March. I did Q2 a couple nights ago or last week, I think. I streamed that. I did my stream of Q3, I think the other night, it was a couple nights ago. And then Q4 was tonight. My goal again is to archive all these on my YouTube channel, hopefully, just so I have some sort of record of them before like the VODs delete on Twitch. But all of the quarterly posts from last year are still on my channel. If anyone even wants to go back and listen to me probably say of sorts 100 times. Thanks. Yeah, I got through, Gemini. So yeah, if anyone cares, my gaming blog is linked on my main Twitch page. I'm going to continue to do this as I foreseeably can, as I see going forward. I don't think I'll stop writing, but ideally, honestly, I wish I could, like, if I wanted to put all the effort in, I would have like footage of the games I've been playing. So like, whether or not I was streaming them or if I saved my footage while playing, I could, like, if I don't have the time for that, but if I could edit in game footage while like reading my impressions, that would be like the ideal YouTube video. But for now, I'm just reading it with some pictures on my posts, like my thoughts and my impressions. And like, if you catch the stray stream, if I happen to have streamed any of these games, like that's, I don't know. I'm trying my best. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. But yeah, that's gonna do it for me. I need to get something to drink or eat or something, and I gotta get up early for work tomorrow, so no game stream tonight. And I won't stream till Saturday, so thanks for listening. Thanks for hanging out. Appreciate, you know, if you're just lurking and chilling out and just listening. It's all appreciated.